Welcome back and make yourself comfortable. Tonight, we are stepping into a forgotten corner of history, one that is a little strange, a little sweet, and far more surprising than most people realize. Before we drift back through time, take a slow breath, let your eyes grow heavy, and settle into whatever helps you unwind. Maybe dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background noise, and let the world outside your room melt away for a while. Now, imagine holding a simple chocolate bar in your hand. Today, it is an ordinary treat, something you might break apart while watching a movie, studying, or just trying to brighten a long day. But more than a century ago, that same innocent-looking candy carried an unexpected reputation. It was considered modern, luxurious, energizing, and even a little mysterious. Not just a sweet snack, but a symbol of progress, of invention, industry, and a nation racing toward its future. Tonight we are asking a curious question. What if one of the world's most beloved chocolates once had a secret? Not a rumor whispered on internet forums, but a tale rooted in the culture, science, marketing, and optimism of the early 1900s. A time when people believed that the right invention, the right ingredient, or the right idea could change everything. To understand this story, we need to travel back to the turn of the 20th century, an age of steam whistles, cobblestone streets, horse-drawn trolleys, and bustling towns just beginning to glow with electric light. America was transforming at breathtaking speed. Machines were reshaping factories, telephones were shrinking distances, and new consumer products were appearing faster than ever before. It was an era obsessed with progress, and many believed that modern science could improve every part of daily life: medicine, work, mood, and even food. Chocolate in this setting was not just dessert. It was modernity wrapped in foil. When Hershey's first entered the scene, it was not merely offering candy. It was offering a brand new kind of hope, affordable luxury. Something once reserved for the elite of Europe was suddenly within reach for shopkeepers, school teachers, factory workers, and excited children with a single nickel to spare. The idea felt revolutionary. A small bar of sweetness that seemed to promise energy, happiness, and a taste of the modern world. But behind the shiny wrappers and cheerful advertisements was a deeper truth about the time. People genuinely believed that food could be both pleasure and power. Newspapers, doctors, pharmacies, and traveling salesmen were obsessed with products that could boost vitality: tonics, wines, elixirs, tablets, powders, and yes, even candies. A snack was not just a snack. It could be invigorating, could fortify the nerves, could awaken the mind. And the public wanted to believe every word of it. So our story begins here, in a culture thrilled by innovation, dazzled by industry, and more than willing to experiment. A world where the boundary between medicine and confectionery was not just thin, it was almost non-existent. If a product promised energy, productivity, or relief from stress, people did not ask many questions. They simply reached for their coin purse. As we sink deeper into tonight's tale, you will see how cocoa collided with the era's craving for stimulation, how marketing amplified myth into national fascination, and how a candy bar became part of a much bigger movement, one filled with excitement, exaggeration, controversy, and eventually regulation. But for now, as you take another slow breath and let your shoulders loosen, just picture it: a small town in 1901, the smell of coal smoke in the morning air, the sound of distant factory whistles, and a candy shop window filled with chocolate bars that shimmered with possibility. People lined up, curious and hopeful, believing that inside those silver wrappers was something more than flavor. Something modern. Something uplifting. Something new. That is where our journey begins. Let us stay in that moment for a little longer. The year is 1901. The streets are dusty. The hats are tall, and the future seems to be arriving faster than anyone can quite understand. Most homes still rely on gas lamps, yet newspapers are filled with promises of electric wonders. Doctors still recommend remedies we would question today, but everyone is convinced science is marching forward with unstoppable confidence. It feels as if the modern world is being built right in front of your eyes. One invention, one advertisement, and one bold claim at a time. In the middle of this whirlwind of progress stands a brand new star of everyday life, the chocolate bar. In earlier centuries, chocolate was rare, expensive, and mostly enjoyed as a drink for the wealthy. But industrialization changed everything. Machines could grind, blend, sweeten, mold, and wrap chocolate faster than any kitchen monastery or royal chef ever could. For the first time in history, the taste of chocolate could travel across states, across oceans, and across social classes. A bar of chocolate in your hand was not just sugar and cocoa. It was a ticket of admission to the modern age. Shops proudly displayed these bars like treasures. Inside the glass case, they gleamed under warm lights, neatly lined up, each one wrapped in packaging that promised delight, comfort, and if the advertisements were to be believed, renewed life. People did not just buy chocolate. They bought the idea of feeling better, moving faster, and becoming more alive in a world that demanded more energy than ever before. Factories were roaring. Cities were growing upward. Workdays were long. Families rushed through chores, schedules, and expectations that had never existed a generation earlier. A tired population, hungry for relief, was easy for advertisers to inspire. And so chocolate rose to fame at the perfect moment. It was sweet. It was modern. It was uplifting. And by the time Hershey's entered the scene, the public was more than ready to believe that a simple bar could make life smoother, brighter, and more manageable. Now imagine yourself stepping into a candy shop on a cool evening. The doorbell rings behind you. A wave of warm chocolate-scented air rolls over your face. The shelves are stacked with tins, jars, striped bags of sweets, and rows of glossy chocolate bars. Children press their noses to the glass. Adults try to act composed, but they buy the candy for themselves just as often as they buy it for their families. For a nickel, the world suddenly feels softer. But beneath the excitement, there was something else at work, something deeper about human nature. People in every era, whether ancient or modern, search for small comforts to carry them through the day. A warm drink, a familiar flavor, or a tiny treat can act as emotional armor against exhaustion, boredom, and uncertainty. Chocolate, in that moment of history, became the universal answer. It was shared joy, packaged for mass production. Newspapers called it fortifying. Posters said it soothed nerves. Families believed it brightened moods. And no one wanted to ask too many questions, because the hope was sweeter than the candy itself. In a society obsessed with progress, no one wanted to slow down and examine the fine print. As you picture this new chocolate craze spreading from city to city, factory to schoolhouse, and living room to workplace, you can almost feel the cultural momentum behind it. A single product had become a national habit. Chocolate socials were held in churches. Chocolate fundraisers popped up in towns. Chocolate advertisements appeared in magazines, beside electric appliances, bicycles, and miracle tonics. It was not just dessert, it was lifestyle branding before the term existed. And this is where our story begins to take shape. For something to become legendary, truly legendary, it must sit at the crossroads of culture, curiosity, and convenience. Hershey's chocolate, at the dawn of the 20th century, stood exactly there. Modern enough to feel futuristic. Familiar enough to feel safe. Energizing enough to spark stories. Affordable enough to reach nearly everyone. Before long, adults began carrying chocolate bars to work. Students tucked them into school bags, and travelers packed them for long journeys. Soldiers would soon carry them into entirely different worlds. Chocolate had become a companion, a reward, a motivator, and, for some, even a tiny symbol of hope. And all of that came before the rumors, the controversies, and the questions that would later swirl around what exactly was inside those bars. Tonight, as we continue this story, keep that image in your mind. A nation falling in love with something simple and sweet, unaware that it would soon become the subject of debate, fascination, myth, and memory. A candy bar was about to become a cultural lightning bolt, not because of what it tasted like, but because of what people believed it could do. And now that you know the setting, the mood, and the momentum, we are ready to step into the heart of the mystery. Now that we have set the stage, Let us follow the story deeper beyond the glowing shop windows, beyond the sweetness, and into the origins of the ingredient that fueled decades of fascination. To understand how chocolate ever became linked fairly or unfairly to energizing legends, we must travel far from American factories and candy counters, across oceans and mountains, to a place where the story of stimulation began long before the age of mass production. Picture yourself standing high in the Andes, thousands of feet above sea level. The air is thin, the wind is sharp, and the earth stretches in wide, ancient silence. Here, long before the first chocolate bar, long before advertising posters and factory molds, people were already turning to nature for strength, endurance, and clarity. Among the rocky slopes grew a simple green leaf that would shape rituals, labor, belief, and later controversy. This was the coca leaf, a plant deeply woven into the culture and spirituality of Andean civilizations. For the indigenous communities who lived in these mountains, the coca leaf was not a luxury. It was a companion. Farmers chewed it during long hours in terraced fields. Messengers carried it on winding trails, helping them run astonishing distances across harsh landscapes. Priests used it in ceremonies, offering it to the earth and the spirits as a symbol of respect and connection. It was, in every sense, a cultural treasure. But it is important to pause here and make something clear, because history often becomes tangled with assumption. In its natural form, this leaf did not send people into frenzy, nor did it resemble the sensational stories told centuries later. Its effects were gentle, reducing fatigue, easing hunger, and sharpening focus. For those who lived in the mountains, it was practical, sacred, and stabilizing. It helped life continue, day after demanding day, in an environment where nature showed no mercy. When European explorers eventually reached the Andes, they encountered this leaf and, unable to understand its cultural meaning, saw only its effects. Over time, the leaf made its way into European curiosity, then into laboratories, where scientists of the 1800s, driven by a hunger for breakthroughs and fame, sought to isolate every property of every plant they discovered. This was the age of bold experimentation, when chemistry, medicine, and ambition often blurred together. Soon, extracts made from exotic plants began appearing in tonics, wines, and miracle remedies sold throughout Europe. These products promised sharper thinking, more energy, lifted spirits, and relief from the dullness of modern exhaustion. People were fascinated by anything that claimed to fight fatigue. And companies, seeing profit in every bottle, leaned into that fascination without hesitation. By the mid to late 1800s, these energizing extracts crossed the Atlantic and entered American markets. Pharmacies embraced them. Traveling salesmen praised them. Doctors, many of them still navigating a young and evolving medical science, sometimes recommended them. An entire culture of invigorating solutions was taking shape. And this set the stage for what would happen next. Now return in your mind to the confectioners of the early 1900s, the candy makers watching trends, reading newspapers, and listening closely to what excited consumers. They saw that society adored anything described as uplifting, scientific, or modern. They saw that people craved energy, relief, stimulation, novelty. And they knew that chocolate had a secret advantage. It already contained its own natural stimulants, gentle ones found in cocoa beans themselves. So an idea formed, and then a question, and then a movement. What if chocolate, the treat everyone loved, could be marketed not only as delicious, but as a source of energy for the busy modern citizen? It was a daring thought, perfectly matched to its era. After all, this was a world that celebrated invention simply for being inventive. A world thrilled by anything that sounded like progress. If tonics could claim to brighten the mind, if sodas could claim to lift the spirit, why should not chocolate bars claim to energize the body? And so, without realizing the legends it would later inspire, the snack industry aligned itself with a new cultural fantasy, the fantasy of effortless energy. A bite for strength, a square for stamina, a bar for the modern pace of life. This is the true beginning of the misunderstanding, the advertising exaggerations, and the myths that would cling to chocolate for decades. Not because chocolate unleashed mayhem, but because people wanted to believe in miracles. They wanted simple answers to complicated exhaustion. They wanted shortcuts to productivity in a world that never stopped moving. And as you exhale slowly and let your shoulders fall, you can almost see how easily the legend would grow from here. A culture hungry for stimulation. A product beloved by the masses. A time when few rules existed to separate hope from hype. It was the perfect recipe for a myth to rise, one that would one day have people wondering whether their favorite candy bar once carried more power than sugar and cocoa alone. In the next part of this story, the legend will collide with industry, advertisement, competition, and controversy. But for now, you know the root, the ancient leaf, the cultural misunderstanding, and the global fascination that set the stage for everything to come. Now that the roots of the legend are clear, let us drift back into early 20th century America, where chocolate was no longer just a foreign curiosity or a luxury for the wealthy. It had become a booming business. And at the center of that boom stood one man and one company whose name would soon be known in every household, Milton Hershey, and the chocolate bar that would carry his dream into the modern world. Imagine a small American town surrounded by quiet farmland and rolling Pennsylvania hills. This is where Hershey decided to build not just a factory, but an entire community. Streets, schools, homes, public spaces, everything was constructed around a single idea: that chocolate could change lives. Hershey believed passionately in creating something affordable, reliable, and comforting. He wanted a treat that was not reserved for kings or aristocrats, but reachable for everyday workers, families, and children with a few coins saved in their pocket. As the factory machines roared to life, something remarkable happened. Chocolate stopped being exotic. It became American. It became ordinary in the best possible way, like music from a radio, or warm bread from a bakery. It was part of daily life. And because it was everywhere, people began expecting more from it. They wanted chocolate that fit the needs of a busy, ambitious, rapidly changing nation. This is where the cultural door opened for a new identity. Chocolate as an energizing companion. You can picture it. A shopkeeper unwrapping a bar after a long morning of lifting crates. A secretary sneaking a square in the afternoon to stay alert through stacks of paperwork. Student taking a bite before late-night reading and long lessons. Chocolate became the quiet assistant to the American day. And advertisers, always listening, always watching, began shaping their messages to match that desire. Posters appeared in cities and small towns, showing bright-eyed children and hard-working adults with a bar in hand. Words like vitality, spirit, strength, and pep floated through newspapers, general stores, and candy shop windows. No one claimed anything extreme. No one made declarations that would spark scandal. The idea was gentler, subtle enough to sound harmless and modern. Chocolate gives you energy. Chocolate helps you keep going. Chocolate supports the modern lifestyle. Worked. The public embraced the message completely. There is a soft irony here. People did not actually need scientific proof. They did not ask questions about ingredients or effects. They simply felt better when they ate chocolate, warmer, happier, lighter, and that feeling was enough. After all, this was a time before strict labeling laws or detailed nutritional charts. If something tasted good and seemed to lift the spirit, that was considered evidence. The country did not just eat chocolate. It trusted chocolate. Meanwhile, inside factories, competition grew fierce. Hershey's success encouraged rivals to launch their own bars, each one promising an advantage: creamier texture, richer flavor, smoother finish, or a more invigorating experience. It was not long before candy makers realized something. Marketing energy was far more exciting than marketing sweetness alone. A sweet treat was pleasant. An energizing treat sounded modern. And so the messaging grew bolder, even while staying vague. Chocolate became, at least in the public imagination, a tiny tool for endurance, a partner for productivity, a delicious helper for the new rhythm of modern life. But as you lie back, breathing slowly and evenly, notice something critical. No one was questioning whether food should play this role. No one wondered if dessert was being asked to do too much. America was moving fast, faster than ever, faster than the human body was used to moving. So people reached for anything that helped them keep pace with the world they were building. And chocolate became their favorite choice, comforting, familiar, safe. This was the moment long before controversy, long before regulation, when chocolate's reputation as a boost took root in the cultural imagination. Not because of a secret formula, not because of hidden ingredients, but because of something much simpler. People wanted to believe that something small and sweet could make life easier. And chocolate, wrapped in silver foil, became a symbol of that hope. In the next part of this story, we will follow that belief into its most dramatic phase, where excitement grew into exaggeration, exaggeration into rumor, and rumor into national debate. But for now, rest in the knowledge that chocolate's energy era did not begin with scandal. It began with optimism, exhaustion, and a country dreaming of an easier path through its busy, beautiful, complicated days. With the country now fully in love with chocolate's sweetness and its reputation for gentle energy, a new chapter of the story began, one shaped not by small-town candy shops, but by booming industries, bold advertisers, and fast-rising competition. This was the era when chocolate stepped onto the national stage, no longer just a treat for the home, but a symbol of ambition, modernity, and lifestyle. The story that would eventually give rise to legends about energizing chocolate truly gained momentum here. Picture America in the first decade of the 1900s. Cities were expanding like never before. Streetcars clanged along busy avenues, telegraph lines stretched across the horizon, and factories filled the skyline with steel frames and smoky silhouettes. The hum of machinery had become the soundtrack of a new century. People worked harder, slept less, traveled farther, and dreamed bigger. Daily life was speeding up, and the nation needed something it could hold in its hand, something small, affordable, and uplifting. Chocolate fit that role perfectly. Candy companies saw the opportunity and rushed to meet demand. They opened new factories, hired armies of workers, and produced thousands upon thousands of bars each day. Newspapers printed ads that portrayed chocolate as a companion for every part of life. A pick-me-up for the office, a reward for children, a comfort for mothers, and a reliable snack for travelers and laborers. The message was clear: chocolate keeps you going. If you walked through a train station in 1908, you might see bright posters of smiling porters and cheerful passengers enjoying a bar to finish the journey strong. Step into a general store, and a shopkeeper would point proudly to chocolate bars displayed at eye level, right beside household essentials like matches, soap, and coffee. Candy makers were no longer selling dessert. They were selling usefulness. And that is when the competitive spirit sharpened. Dozens of companies now wanted to be the chocolate for the modern American. They did not want to be sweet, they wanted to be essential. So they began using the language of vitality, stamina, and youthful energy. Words like invigorating, brisk, stimulating, and fortifying appeared on wrappers, pamphlets, and posters. The public did not question these words. They embraced them. After all, this was the age of miracle tonics and scientific remedies. So if a chocolate bar promised to lift you up or sharpen your day, who was going to argue? Slowly, a blur began to form, an overlap between candy marketing, wellness culture, and the public imagination. Chocolate had always been a treat. But now, it became a tool, a helper, a silent partner in productivity. People did not just enjoy it, they relied on it. And here, in this blur, the legend began to sprout its first roots. Because the more a product promises, the more people begin to speculate. And the more they speculate, the more imagination fills in the blanks. A factory worker might say, chocolate helps me finish my shift. A shopkeeper might whisper, gives me pep. A mother might tell a friend, my children never seem tired after dessert. None of these claims were dramatic, but together echoed across towns, trains, schools, factories, and parlors. They formed a cultural chorus. Chocolate became associated not just with pleasure, but with power. Even though cocoa naturally contains only mild, harmless stimulants, the storytelling around it began to exaggerate itself. And at that time, There were no strict labeling laws, no ingredient transparency, and no regulations requiring companies to explain exactly what was inside a bar. It was the perfect environment for myths to grow. People connected dots that were never meant to form a picture, and before long, whispers turned into assumptions. Why do I feel more awake after chocolate? Why do my children run faster after dessert? Why do I finish my work more easily with a bar in my pocket? And because human imagination loves a good mystery, a new question arrived. What if there is something extra inside? Now, to be clear, chocolate's rise had nothing to do with secret formulas in this early stage. It had everything to do with exhausted workers, clever marketing, cultural optimism, and the genuine mood-lifting chemistry of cocoa itself. But myths do not ask permission. They grow wherever curiosity lives. As you breathe slowly and let your eyes relax, notice how harmless the beginnings of this legend really were. No scandal. No accusations. Just a nation enjoying a treat and connecting their own experiences to hopeful promises printed on cheerful posters. But myths have a life cycle. And sooner or later, every comforting belief crosses paths with controversy. The questions would grow louder. The rumors would grow wilder. And eventually, America would demand answers. What exactly are we eating and why does it make us feel alive? The moment is coming. But not yet. For now, chocolate is still innocent in the public eye, sweet, trusted, and beloved. Its transformation into a national obsession has only just begun. By the time chocolate had secured its place in lunch pails, office drawers, and school satchels, something new began to stir beneath the surface of everyday life. Enthusiasm slowly gave way to curiosity, and curiosity, if left long enough, always leads to questions. What, exactly, was giving this cheerful little treat its reputation for pep and productivity? Why did it seem to brighten moods, push away tired thoughts, and leave children brimming with restless energy? America in the early 1910s was caught between excitement and anxiety. The industrial boom had lifted hopes, but it had also strained bodies. People worked longer hours, juggled unfamiliar routines, and lived in a world that never seemed to pause. In such a restless environment, chocolate's gentle lift felt almost magical. A square before work made the day smoother. A square after supper kept spirits high. A square during chores turned monotony into something almost pleasant. But here is a universal truth about human beings. Whenever something helps us feel better, we want to understand why. And when we do not have answers, we invent them. Teachers noticed students buzzing with energy after recess. Factory supervisors observed workers moving with surprising alertness after breaks. Parents laughed about bedtime battles that followed dessert, children racing through hallways as though powered by invisible engines. At first, these stories were harmless. But repetition has power. The joke became a whisper. The whisper became a wondering. Could a simple candy bar really be doing something more? What the public did not know was that cocoa naturally contains gentle stimulants, tiny harmless amounts of theobromine and caffeine that naturally lift mood. And without understanding that science, people did what people have always done. They filled the blanks with imagination. Some insisted chocolate contained secret European ingredients. Others claimed it held ancient botanicals from distant lands. A few shrugged and said, "I do not know what is in it, but it works." The uncertainty made chocolate more exciting, not less. This was, after all, an era obsessed with invigorating tonics, electrifying remedies, and scientific elixirs. If sodas could claim to lift the spirit, and tonics could claim to sharpen the mind, why should not chocolate claim a little spark of its own? Candy companies did not deny it. They did not confirm it either. They simply smiled through elegant posters and cheerful slogans, letting the public write the myth for them. Energy was fashionable. Stimulation was modern. And chocolate fit the trend perfectly. Adults embraced it as a dignified indulgence, refined, helpful, and somehow elevating. Children adored it as a source of secret power. Even grandparents suspicious of radios and factory machines quietly admitted that a bit of chocolate does wonders for the nerves. But not everyone was charmed. A small wave of moral reformers began scolding parents, blaming sweets for overexcitement, youthful chaos, and a nation that could not sit still. They did not blame sugar. They blamed society. And chocolate found itself on the edges of a storm it never asked to enter. Still, at this stage, the questions were soft. Curiosity was playful, not paranoid. The nation was still delighted. Chocolate was still a friend to comfort a modern joy. But whispers have gravity. The more they repeat, the heavier they become. Because when a country grows tired, overstimulated, and overwhelmed, the very thing it once praised for giving energy can become the thing it fears for refusing to let life slow down. The stage was set. The questions were multiplying. And chocolate's story was about to enter its most dramatic era, not one of sweetness, but of scrutiny. As the whispers grew and curiosity deepened, America found itself on the edge of a new mood, one less playful and far more anxious. The same cultural energy that had once cheered for innovation now began to question it. The country was growing tired, morally cautious, and increasingly suspicious of anything that felt too modern or too stimulating. And in that uneasy atmosphere, chocolate's reputation, once shiny and unquestioned, became tangled in a growing web of doubt. To understand this shift, imagine the early 1910s, a society balancing optimism with worry. Industrial progress had created momentum, but it had also created exhaustion. Reform movements were sweeping across the nation, temperance campaigns, purity crusades, and moral movements promising to cleanse American life of indulgence and excess. Newspapers printed sermons disguised as journalism. Community leaders warned of national overstimulation. Suddenly, the appetite for energy, once a symbol of progress, became something to fear. It was during this uneasy transition that chocolate, of all things, stepped into the crosshairs. Parents who once laughed at their children's hyper antics now scolded them for being too spirited. Teachers, drained by lively classrooms, blamed sweets in lunch pails. Ministers preached restraint, warning families to avoid modern temptations. Reformers, always hungry for a new enemy, began circulating pamphlets, questioning whether certain snacks were good for the character of the nation. Chocolate, innocent as it was, suddenly found itself in the middle of a cultural tug-of-war. Nothing had changed inside the bar. The recipe was the same. The wrapper was the same. The flavor was the same. But perception had shifted. The public no longer looked at chocolate and saw joy. They looked at it and saw possibility for mischief, distraction, or moral decay. Not because of evidence, but because the culture had decided that too much excitement was now a threat. It did not help that advertisements still used words like invigorating and fortifying. Those same words that once sounded hopeful now sounded suspicious. Reformers treated them as hidden warnings. Critics treated them as confessions. And beneath everyday life, a quiet question began to echo. What if our food is not as simple as it seems? What if pleasure leads to trouble? What if stimulation is a danger, not a delight? Soon, rumor stepped in where logic stepped out. Stories spread, small, exaggerated tales that grew with every retelling. A boy who would not sleep after dessert became a symbol of corrupted youth. A restless classroom became proof of dangerous snacking. A burst of late-night energy became an omen whispered between neighbors. People who once praised chocolate for productivity now muttered, "Maybe we should be more careful." The joy remained, but the trust began to wobble. Candy companies sensed the shift. Advertisements softened. Bold claims disappeared. Words like comfort, delight, and simple happiness returned. But suspicion, once awakened, does not fall asleep on command. Communities quietly split into two camps. Camp 1, chocolate is harmless. Kids are just energetic. Modern life needs modern comforts. Camp 2, anything that lifts mood or energy must be hiding something beneath the wrapper. And so the first true controversy in chocolate's history began, not fueled by science, but by imagination, exhaustion, and cultural anxiety. It is almost poetic. The very trait that made chocolate beloved, its ability to lift the spirit, became the trait that placed it under suspicion. The country no longer asked, "How does chocolate help us?" It began asking, "What if chocolate harms us?" The great debate had begun. From here would come headlines, hearings, louder critics, defensive manufacturers, and eventually the earliest government discussions about regulating food. Chocolate, without meaning to, had wandered into politics, morality, and national identity. But pause here on this tipping point. A nation caught between delight and doubt. A beloved treat standing in the path of a cultural storm. And a story about to shift from whisper to argument, from curiosity to controversy. The sweetness of yesterday was fading, and a storm was forming on the horizon. The whispers had ripened into worry, and the worry had swollen into debate. By the early 1910s, America, once amused by chocolate's energizing reputation, began treating that same reputation as a potential threat. Curiosity hardened into suspicion. And suspicion, when amplified by culture and fear, always finds its way into headlines. And so the newspapers pounced. Across cities and towns, bold titles began to appear. Are modern snacks too stimulating? A hidden threat in our candy. Is indulgence making our children restless? Nothing was confirmed. Nothing was proven. But uncertainty makes for dramatic reading, and dramatic reading sells papers. Journalists, hungry for attention, amplified the unease. They interviewed tired schoolteachers, frustrated parents, and outspoken reformers, each offering emotional anecdotes rather than evidence. A restless child became a cautionary tale. A noisy classroom became a public warning. A scattered evening became a crisis. Chocolate, once the nation's comfort, suddenly had a shadow. Public meetings followed. In church basements, in school auditoriums, in stiffly decorated town halls, people gathered to discuss the problem of stimulation. Citizens stood behind podiums and spoke with grave seriousness, as though the fate of the country hinged on dessert. Some argued the nation was losing its discipline. Others warned that sweets encouraged reckless habits. A few, reaching for grander meaning, declared that moral decay often begins with small indulgences. In these gatherings, chocolate never stood alone. It was lumped together with broader fears: modernity, speed, excitement, change. People overwhelmed by a fast new world needed something to blame. Chocolate was small, visible, and easy to accuse. It became a symbol, not a snack. Of course, not everyone agreed. At the back of those rooms sat parents who remembered joy instead of fear. Workers who relied on small comforts after long shifts. Children who adored their treats and could not understand why adults were suddenly angry about candy. A few voices tried to defend reason, reminding crowds that chocolate had lived in American homes for years with no catastrophe. But fear, once stirred, does not soften easily. Meanwhile, inside corporate offices, candy companies watched with mounting anxiety. Executives gathered in wood-paneled rooms, surrounded by charts, telegrams, and stacks of clippings. They worried not only about sales but about reputation, because once trust cracks, it rarely repairs cleanly. Their response was careful, almost timid. They softened their messaging. They retired words like invigorating and stimulating. They replaced them with comfort, delight, and simple happiness. They hoped the storm would pass if they stayed quiet. But the debate did not fade. Newspapers printed letters from outraged readers. Editorial cartoons mocked both sides: children bouncing off walls, chocolates wearing guilty grins. The conversation slid from logic into theater. And once a topic becomes spectacle, the government eventually steps onto the stage. Officials began murmuring about investigations and public transparency. Nothing formal yet, but enough to make manufacturers sweat. If Washington stepped in, it could mean inspections, restrictions, or entirely new laws. For an industry that sold joy wrapped in foil, the idea of federal scrutiny felt suffocating. And so America entered a strange moment. A nation that adored chocolate, yet feared it. A product that brought joy, yet attracted suspicion. A debate in which everyone was shouting and almost no one was listening. Pause here, breathe slowly, and you can feel the tension of the turning point. What began as hopeful marketing had evolved into cultural anxiety. Chocolate had become more than a flavor. It was now a mirror reflecting a nation that was excited, exhausted, hopeful, and afraid of losing control. And still, the story was not finished. The headlines would grow louder. The critics would grow bolder. And soon, the government would step in officially, demanding answers candy makers were not prepared to give. The sweetness of the early era had melted away. Ahead lay scrutiny, hearings, and the birth of American food regulation, a shift that would transform not only chocolate, but the entire relationship between the public and the products they consumed. The debate that once lived in quiet living rooms and crowded church basements soon outgrew its small-town origins. By the early 1910s, the question of chocolate's energizing influence had exploded into a national conversation, one that could no longer be contained by editorials, pamphlets, or public scolding. When a rumor becomes a movement, and a movement becomes a spectacle, it eventually demands a stage. And in America, that stage is the government. So the whispers moved to Washington. Newspaper headlines, once playful, now carried sharper tones. Reporters suggested that chocolate and the broader world of invigorating foods might require official oversight. Concerned citizens mailed letters to their representatives, urging investigations into the stimulating effects of modern snacks. Reform groups lobbied loudly for transparency. Even religious leaders, eager to preserve moral order, called upon lawmakers to intervene. In government offices, folders thick with clippings began to pile up. Politicians, sensing opportunity, stepped forward with stern faces and urgent speeches. They warned that the nation must not fall asleep at the wheel of progress. America, they declared, deserved to know what was in its food. And so, preliminary hearings began. Picture a tall, echoing chamber, polished wood, stiff suits, and heavy silence. Rows of spectators leaned forward, curious whether a simple candy bar could truly warrant such attention. At long tables sat teachers, doctors, reformers, and anxious citizens who claimed that chocolate had changed their households. Some spoke with genuine concern. Others simply enjoyed being heard. Across from them sat the candy representatives, carefully groomed, politely worded, chosen for their calm voices and unshakable smiles. They placed chocolate bars on the table like peace offerings, hoping the sweetness might soften the room. The testimonies began. A teacher described unruly students. A mother recounted sleepless children. A reformer warned of overstimulation and moral drift. No data. No proof. Only vivid stories, emotional, memorable, and persuasive to a public already drifting toward fear. Then came the medical voices. Some spoke neutrally, explaining that cocoa contained mild stimulants but nothing alarming. Others were dramatic, warning that America was entering an age of dietary recklessness. The variety of opinions did not calm anyone. Confusion, as always, only fed the fire. When it was the candy company's turn, their statements were careful and controlled. They insisted their products were wholesome, safe, and enjoyed responsibly by millions. They reminded the room that chocolate had been part of American life for years without crisis. They acknowledged cocoa's natural stimulating properties but avoided every deeper question. They never mentioned cocoa extracts, experiments, or anything that might create scandal. Silence, they believed, was safer. But silence invites suspicion. The more they dodged specifics, the more spectators leaned in, waiting for a secret to spill. The hearings ended with no conclusion, only headlines. Within days, newspapers splashed dramatic summaries across the nation. One headline thundered, "Government questions candy kings, what are they hiding?" Another whispered, ominously, "Children at risk, nation waits for answers." Nothing was resolved. Everything was amplified. Pressure mounted. Politicians demanded stronger oversight. Citizens echoed it. And behind closed doors, candy executives finally understood the age of total freedom was ending. For decades, food companies had lived in a world with limitless possibility and almost no supervision. But now, America wanted clarity, labels, rules, guarantees. And chocolate, innocent or not, was becoming a case study for reform. Even as hearings adjourned and reporters rushed to print their stories, one truth was unmistakable. The trust between the public and its food had cracked. And trust, once shaken, is harder to sweeten than any bar of chocolate. The stage was now fully set for the turning point. A moment that would reshape chocolate, reshape regulation, and transform American food culture forever. And in that transformation, a legend would solidify. Half history, half myth. A story that would follow chocolate for generations to come. The questions had been asked. The hearings had been held. The newspapers had stirred every ounce of public emotion they could find. And now, something that had been building quietly for years finally arrived at the nation's doorstep: regulation. After decades of excitement, indulgence, marketing freedom, and ingredients that shifted with every trend, America was ready to draw a line in the sand. Food, once a frontier, was about to be supervised. In 1906, the momentum that had been gathering beneath the surface took shape as the Pure Food and Drug Act. It was a landmark decision, born not from a single scandal, but from a growing unease about what exactly Americans were consuming. Households had endured tainted tonics, exaggerated miracle cures, mislabeled syrups, and unregulated energizing solutions. The government could no longer ignore the rising plea from citizens: tell us the truth about our food. Chocolate was not the target. It was simply caught in the rising tide. But for candy makers, especially Hershey and its competitors, the effect was unavoidable. The era of mystery ingredients and suggestive advertising was over. The law required transparency, and transparency required change. Factories that once operated with open-ended freedom now had to meet clear standards. Ingredients had to be listed. Labels had to match reality. Claims had to be reasonable. And most importantly, manufacturers could no longer rely on vague promises of vitality or botanical invigoration without scrutiny. Imagine standing on a factory floor in this new era. The machines still hum. The cocoa still warms in heavy copper kettles. Workers still laugh and shout over the clatter of conveyor belts. But the mood has shifted. Supervisors study clipboards more closely. Inspectors walk the floor making notes. Recipes are locked away, reviewed, revised, then revised again. For the first time, chocolate must not only taste good, it must prove itself good. In quiet boardrooms, executives faced difficult choices. If even the hint of controversy lingered around energizing additives or exotic extracts, or botanical enhancements, then the safest path forward was to remove them entirely. Chocolate needed to be simple, clean, unquestionable. And so, gradually and quietly, the formulas changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways that altered the essential experience of a chocolate bar. But carefully, intentionally, and decisively. Anything that could invite doubt, criticism, or rumor was reduced or eliminated. The goal was not just compliance, it was restoration. The public needed to feel safe again. They needed to trust again. Advertising softened as well. Posters set aside words like stimulating and bracing. The tone shifted from excitement to comfort, from pep for your day to pleasure for your moments. Chocolate went from modern miracle to simple delight. From fuel for the body to a treat for the spirit. The energy era was ending, and a gentler image was beginning to take its place. The public reaction was mixed. Some were relieved. They trusted the act, trusted the government, and trusted that food would now be safer. They welcomed the calm. They believed the nation was becoming wiser and more responsible. Others felt something had been lost, an adventurous chapter closing. They missed the boldness of the old advertisements, the thrill of novelty, the playful idea that something as small as a candy bar could carry mystery and possibility. Nostalgia, even in its earliest form, began to take root. But whether people approved or complained, the shift was permanent. Chocolate, once swept up in the era of stimulants and speculation, settled into its new role as a dependable friend. No longer a spark of modern rebellion, but a familiar comfort in a changing world. If you pause and breathe slowly, you might notice something gentle in this moment of the story. The controversy did not destroy chocolate. It refined it. It pushed it toward clarity. It ensured that future generations would enjoy sweetness without suspicion, pleasure without panic, indulgence without debate. The legends, of course, would linger. Whispers about the old formula would drift through decades of storytelling. But legally and culturally, a line had been drawn. Chocolate had entered a new age, an age of labels, laws, and lasting trust. And in that quieter space, a new question began to form in the public imagination. What really happened during those early years? Because once a myth takes root, it does not disappear. Wait. It sleeps. It resurfaces whenever people look backward and wonder whether the past was stranger, wilder, and sweeter than they ever realized. The stage was now prepared for reflection, nostalgia, and reinterpretation. And the legend of energizing chocolate was ready to evolve from controversy into cultural memory. When the new regulations settled into place and the era of mysterious ingredients slipped quietly into memory, chocolate entered a calmer chapter of its story. The bars on store shelves looked the same. They tasted familiar. They carried the same comforting sweetness. But something in the culture had shifted. The storm had passed and what remained was reflection. Across the country, households adjusted with surprising speed. Children still saved pennies for their favorite treats. Workers still slipped chocolate into lunch pails. Families still brought bars to picnics, train rides, and long afternoons on the porch. Life went on, steady and ordinary. Yet beneath that ordinariness, a subtle nostalgia began to grow. People remembered how things used to feel. They told stories embellished, exaggerated, softened by memory about the early years when chocolate seemed to brighten the whole world. Parents recalled the laughter. Teachers recalled the energy. Old factory workers recalled the heady pace of those first booming decades. Whether or not those memories were accurate did not matter. The legend had taken root. Human beings, after all, do not remember facts. They remember feelings. As the 1920s and 1930s unfolded, the memory of the energizing chocolate era transformed into a kind of folk tale told beside fireplaces, whispered in schoolyards, shared at family gatherings. Some swore the old bars could keep you awake for days. Others claimed that one square could lift your spirits like nothing else on earth. A few insisted that the original formula had been quietly superior, as if the past always holds a sweetness the present cannot match. Candy companies did nothing to encourage these myths, but they did not fight them either. Why would they? A legend, even a misunderstood one, can be good for business as long as the current product is trusted. And the present, at last, was trusted. The labels were clear. The recipes were stable. The controversies were fading. The chocolate bar had become what it was always meant to be, a simple pleasure in an increasingly complicated world. But myths have a particular habit. They do not disappear. They wait. They linger at the edges of culture, especially when people grow wistful for times they never fully understood. And so, as America continued to modernize, the legend of the old chocolate with extra pep became a cultural echo, faint but persistent. Imagine a small general store in a quiet town. A bell rings. Two older gentlemen stand near the counter, reminiscing about the good old days. One leans in and says, as if sharing a secret, "Chocolate is not what it used to be." His friend nods, though neither has proof, only memory softened by time. Meanwhile, young children, hearing these murmurs, begin to picture the past as something magical. A time when candy bars were extraordinary, almost enchanted. A simple treat becomes a doorway into imagination. And that, perhaps, is how legends survive longest, not through evidence, but through wonder. By the mid-20th century, as chocolate became a symbol of holidays, movie nights, school rewards, soldier rations, and everyday comfort, its wilder history faded into background noise. But every so often a spark reappeared. A newspaper column would mention the old rumors. A dinner conversation would revive the question. A curious student would ask, did chocolate really used to be different? And the answer, depending on who was asked, might be a shrug, a laugh, or a knowing smile. In this peaceful era, chocolate found something it had never fully possessed before: stability. It was no longer a subject of national debate. It was no longer part of a cultural tug-of-war. It had become part of the fabric of life, steady and reliable. Yet that very stability gave the legend more room to glow. In contrast with the calm sweetness of the present, the past looked dramatic, exciting, mysterious. People missed a world they never truly lived in, only imagined. A world where a chocolate bar could spark energy, controversy, curiosity, and chaos. Nostalgia is powerful that way. It edits, polishes. It remembers emotion, not evidence. So the myth lived on, not in laboratories or legal documents, but in the collective imagination. The controversy that once frightened parents and fueled hearings now softened into a quirky historical footnote, something half serious and half amused. A story told with a smile, a raised eyebrow, and a whisper, there was a time when chocolate was something else. The truth, the myth, and the memory blended together until they were nearly inseparable, a swirled pattern, like marble in a confectioner's pan. And that swirl, more than any ingredient, ensured that the legend would never fully fade. Chocolate had survived regulation. It had survived scrutiny. And now it would survive through story, because stories, unlike candy bars, do not melt. They endure. The stage was now set for the final chapter, where history and myth meet, where curiosity lingers, and where the modern world looks back at an old question with a gentler, wiser smile. What was real? And what was imagination? And now, at the final stretch of this long, curious journey, we arrive in the quiet present. The shelves in modern stores are lined with familiar bars, wrapped in shiny foil, predictable and comforting. No scandals. No whispers. No hidden surprises. Just chocolate, simple, sweet, and steady. The story has settled into peace. When you unwrap a bar today, there is no moral panic in the shadows. No courtroom debates. No rumors about mysterious ingredients. Children fall asleep after dessert. Adults enjoy a late-night snack without reorganizing the entire house at 2 a.m. Life is calmer now. Softer. More measured. But somewhere in the dusty corners of history, the echoes remain. The laughter of children racing through schoolyards, unable to sit still. The raised eyebrows of reformers, warning of invigorating dangers. The energized factory floors. The soda fountains buzzing with excitement. The headlines that once tried to sound alarms. The whispers. The legends. All of it still lingers, like a faint aroma of cocoa drifting from a memory you can almost touch. You can feel it if you sit with the story long enough, that sense that the past was wilder, stranger, and somehow larger than life. That an ordinary candy bar could once spark arguments, fuel imaginations, inspire myths, and stir an entire nation's energy. All because people did not fully understand what they were tasting. But that is the charm of history, is not it? We think we remember events, but what we truly remember are feelings. Curiosity. Excitement. Fear. Joy. Confusion. Wonder. Those emotions survive long after the facts have gone silent. That is why a simple chocolate bar, an everyday object, could weave itself into legend. In reality, the Hershey's bars of the past were never magical. They were never mythical. They were simply products of their time, shaped by curiosity, by experimentation, by a world eager for miracle solutions and modern progress. A world that moved fast, believed boldly, and questioned slowly. Today, science is clearer. Regulations are stricter. Labels are detailed. But something small was lost along the way, that unpredictable, chaotic spark of discovery. We gained safety, but we lost mystery. And yet, maybe that is all right. Because now, when we look back, we can enjoy the story without consequence. We can smile at the absurdity. We can marvel at the courage and the foolishness of the past. We can shake our heads at the debates, the panic, the hype, and still enjoy the sweetness that survived. Modern chocolate may not give you wings, but it gives you something gentler: comfort, reliability, a tiny moment of peace at the end of a long day, a signal to the brain that whispers you can rest now. And maybe, just maybe, that is the real magic chocolate was meant to have. Not chaos, not controversy, not unrestrained energy, but calm, a quiet joy, a familiar taste, a moment to breathe, a moment to pause, a moment to remember that life can be warm and simple and sweet for no other reason than that we allow it to be. So tonight, as you lay back and let your eyes grow heavier, imagine the story drifting away. Imagine the buzzing factories fading into silence. Imagine the crowded soda fountains dissolving into memory. Imagine the headlines, the laughter, the chaos of the past folding closed, page by page, like a book returning to its shelf. You are left with only the softest parts of the story, the sweetness, the nostalgia, and the gentle understanding that history, even at its strangest, always leaves us with something to savor. Take a slow breath. Let your thoughts cool and settle, like melted chocolate smoothing into a mold. The world outside can wait. For now, you have wandered through time, explored an unexpected corner of history, and returned safely home, wiser, calmer, and a little more amused by the whims of the past. Rest. Settle in. Let the last traces of this tale fade like candlelight. And if you enjoy a piece of chocolate tomorrow, smile at the secret only you now fully understand: that even the sweetest things can hold remarkable stories. So that brings us to the end of tonight's journey, a strange, sweet chapter of history where a simple chocolate bar once carried far more story than anyone expected. From ancient mountains and sacred leaves, to factory floors, soda fountains, moral panics, and peaceful modern shelves, it has been quite the path for something we now buy without a second thought. If there is a lesson tucked inside all of this, it might be that history is never as simple as it looks on a label. Ordinary things, even a candy bar, can hold extraordinary stories when we slow down long enough to look back. Sometimes the past is wild. Sometimes it is funny. Sometimes it is a little unbelievable. And sometimes it just makes us appreciate the quiet, normal moments we have now. As you settle in for the night, let your mind drift away from factories and headlines, and let it rest on something calm and familiar. You have traveled far enough for one evening. The world can wait until morning. Thank you for spending your time here with me, listening, imagining, and wandering through history. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to join me again next time, where we will explore another forgotten corner of the past. Slowly, gently, and at a pace meant for resting minds. For now, close your eyes. Unclench your jaw. Let your breathing soften. Let your thoughts melt, just like chocolate on a warm day. Good night. Sleep well. And I will see you in the next story.